Hey folks, welcome back to Only the Best Fantasy Novels. My name is Robin, and today I want to talk about probably one of the most fun trilogies I've been able to read in a little while now, and that is the Dark Elf trilogy in chronological order. The first trilogy featuring Drizzt Du'Orden, probably the most infamous character from the Forgotten Realms setting of Dungeons and Dragons, of R.A. Salvatore fame. So, what did I think of this trilogy? The simplest way to put it, the simplest way to go about this, I think I'm just going to discuss the three individual books, one at a time. And the first of those books is Homeland. So, Homeland was a pretty interesting story. I'm happy that I started with this trilogy, mainly because Homeland introduces us to the character of Drizzt. It literally starts right from the get-go with his birth, a night on which a bunch of crazy stuff happens. It gives us, right off the bat, it gives us a glaring look at how savage and how dark and how terrible this world is that Drizzt is born into. And that it pretty much sets the stage for the book to proceed from there. So this is essentially just Bildungsroman, his coming-of-age story. We follow him from birth, literally birth, throughout his training and onwards until he eventually develops the skills and becomes the character that we know and love eventually. That's essentially the whole aspect of this book. So, what did I think of it overall? First and foremost, I was completely blown away by the quality of this book. It was far beyond anything I expected. Generally, shared world fanfiction like this, like licensed fanfiction, it's really just there to make money off of the existing fan base. The quality tends to be not that great, but it doesn't matter because it's written by fans for fans, and we all love it anyway. I'm personally a big fan of these types of stories. You can actually see on my shelf I have the Legend of the Five Rings shared world at the moment. All the books that are being released in the new from Academic Books. But anyway, back to this particular story. Like I was saying, I was completely blown away by just how great this novel was. And the thing that makes it so great is, bar none, the characterization. R.A. Salvatore does an absolutely marvelous job of introducing us to this character of Drizzt, who is far from a typical dark elf. He internalizes and he has his own concepts of honor, of fair play, of justice, of morality that is a complete opposite. It's a complete opposite from the typical dark elf and the society that he's raised in. A society that's built on backstabbing, treachery, betrayal, murder, injustice, all slapped under a veneer of impartiality and fair play that everyone acknowledges as utter nonsense. Essentially, you can do it, but if you get caught, that's the only problem. The only rule is don't get caught. Don't leave survivors. That's the society that Drizzt was born and raised in, and his character is a complete opposite from everyone around him. It's a matrilineal, matriarchal society where him as a man, he's abused, he's set aside, he's belittled, he's pretty much taught that he's worth nothing and to no one, he's irrelevant. Yeah, it's a pretty intense character study throughout his entire journey from birth. As he learns and he grows and he comes into his power, we see a constant struggle where he has these concepts that make sense to him but which are utterly alien to the world around him, and it puts him in constant conflict with the world around him. It gives him a sense of naivety oftentimes that results in him just being. It always ended up in the short end of the stick, basically. It's just wonderfully done. The characterization, it absolutely steals the show. Not that characterization is the only driving force of this book. Salvatore is a master writer. Like I said, I'm completely shocked by just how good these books were. It hooked me right from the get-go. It was fun, it was engaging, it was intense. The action starts pretty much from the get-go and it doesn't relent. We have just this entire story that's just steeped in intrigue and betrayal. It has trouble brewing, different elements just waiting in the wings, waiting for a moment to strike. It just gives everything this sense of intense anticipation that it just hooks you and it just keeps you going, and it keeps you wanting to read more and more and more. These books are roughly 300 pages, but they flew by so fast. They're so engaging. Like the 3 books in this trilogy, I think I read them over the course of 2 days, if so much. I was just hooked. It's completely spellbinding. Yeah, I'm just getting excited just thinking about it. So that's pretty much Homeland. I don't want to spoil more. What else can I talk about? I guess I can talk about the world building, which, given the fact that this is already a fully realized setting within Dungeons and Dragons, it's no surprise that we get, pretty much from inception, we get a fully realized world. We have deep lore that we're met with. We have a society that's fully developed, fully realized, and we're pretty much just introduced to things from the get-go. Nothing really needs. There's very little we don't see right off the bat, if that makes sense. Like, and the best part is that there's no info dumping. Nothing that felt like info dumping to me, at least. Like, it just all unfolded as part of the story, because when things happen, that's when the opportunity came up to introduce us to this world, and we were taught that the reason why this particular event happens is because of this particular aspect of the world. It's just marvelously done. It's wonderfully done. It doesn't slow down the story. It doesn't bog down the story. It contributes to it. It elevates it. It gives it a richness, a deepness that it makes it feel a bit more meatier than it would an action-packed sword and sorcery, because first and foremost, this is an action-packed story. Right from the get-go, we have battles, we have war, we have fights, we have backstabbing, we have betrayal, right from start to finish throughout this book. But first and foremost, the thing that drives this book is the characterization. This book, from the get-go, as we're introduced to Drizzt, we see where this conflict is headed. We can tell just because of the way that Drizzt is constantly challenging and is constantly questioning the world around him. It's a wonderful case of nature versus nurture. It's a testament to the fact that you don't necessarily need to let the circumstances of your birth rule your life. And it all culminates in this really intense story, this intense moment when Drizzt faces a choice to either go down the path of someone who he has come to learn has similar intentions to him, similar motivations, similar ideals to him. He can choose that path and live what to him seems a tragic life, a terrible life, or he can strike out on his own and do his own thing. And he makes an interesting choice, to say the least. I've said a lot about Drizzt, but the other characters in this book are just as interesting. There's the Swordmaster, Zaknafian, who is a mentor to Drizzt, who has similar ideals, similar morals, and he serves as a what-if for Drizzt. You can see a potential future for Drizzt, but you can also see he's a tale of caution of what Drizzt could end up becoming if he's not careful. We have his mother, Mother Malice, who, given the nature of this matrilineal society, to say there's no love lost there is at the bare minimum. We have his brother, who right off the bat sets himself apart in our mind by doing this utterly dastardly act that there's no mistaking him from any other character throughout this book. We have his sisters, we have his sisters with some interesting personalities. We have one of them who's like pretty much a complete sociopath, just waiting to take the helms of power. We have another who seems to have something resembling a soft spot for Drizzt, but she's in constant conflict with her feelings as opposed to what she thinks her duty is, or should be, as given her station in the household. It's an interesting cast of characters, and they each in their own way, they kind of add, they kind of serve to highlight different facets of just absolutely mind-blowing characterization. This book, it all comes back to the characterization for me. It's the element of the book that just hooked me right from the get-go and just kept me hooked from start to finish. I think that pretty much sums up everything I have to say about Homeland. An amazing book, an amazing introduction to this world. It's the first book I've read with Drizzt, and I can easily see why it's highly recommended as the starting place for Drizzt. For once, one of the rare cases where it's recommended you ignore publication order and do chronological order. I 100% get it. I honestly don't know, because I haven't read the Icewind Dale trilogy yet, which is the first trilogy publication-wise. I am going to read it very soon, given how hooked I was on this trilogy. But at this point in time, I have to say that going with this trilogy, starting with Homeland, was the best choice I could have made. But anyway, like I said earlier, at the end of this book, Drizzt faces a choice that he has to make. And that leads him directly into where we see at the start of the second book. The second book named Exile. Now, I don't consider this a spoiler, because you can read about it in the blurb. It's literally in the title of the book. But essentially the choice that Drizzt makes is to leave Menzoberranzan and leave the city of the Dark Elves and strike out on his own. He does this by fleeing into the Underdark and basically living as a hermit. The Underdark is a savage, wild, terrible world. It's completely unforgiving. It's full of dangers. It's barren. There's little to sustain life, little to sustain society unless you're in large numbers. And this is the world that Drizzt steps into. Right off the bat, everything we thought we knew about Drizzt from the first book gets thrown completely out, because the Drizzt that we meet in Exile is a completely different character. And once again, the star of the show is the amazing characterization, fueled by the absolutely splendid writing of Salvatore. So, the Drizzt that we meet at the start of Exile is a completely different being. A significant amount of time has passed. In human years, not so much in elf years, but the change it has wrought on Drizzt is like night and day. He's a completely different person, not for the better. He's been on his own for a long time, fighting, essentially just surviving on autopilot. He's lost his ability to essentially function as a member of society, and we find him at the very start of Exile in a very low stage in life, starting to crumble under the sheer pressure of what his choices led him to make. It caves into a sort of pressure. He starts to make a choice that he understands is not going to end well, but he does it anyway. And in a way, he starts to come into essentially a found family, which was pretty nice. It was a good story for a time, but at the same time, things haven't been idle in Menzoberranzan. The House Du'Orden has been dealing with the consequences of Drizzt's failure in the first book, and now they're given an ultimatum, and they have no choice but to act on it, and they do so in a extremely crazy way. Like they pull out their trump card essentially, and that trump card is it's a very dangerous weapon that they unleash against Drizzt. It's a weapon that stalks him throughout the novel, and similar to the first novel, where we had this slow brew anticipation of an epic clash that's coming, because because one of the great things that Salvatore does with his writing is he gives us the POV of the antagonists in different ways. So we do get some scenes where we see the antagonist circling and closing in on Drizzt. So it just ramps up the intensity, just ramps up the anticipation. So anyway, this threat starts to stalk Drizzt throughout this, practically at the start of the novel, maybe within the first quarter, and throughout the entire book, this threat circles him. It stalks him, and it just lends us, it gives you like a fast-paced intensity, this anticipatory feeling, because Drizzt, it essentially becomes a game of cat and mouse. Drizzt has to give up a sense of security that he's finally developed after these years. He has to go on the run, and while on the run, he inadvertently stumbles into some shocking new dangers, some terrible beings, some terrible foes, and it becomes essentially a series of quests and battles and characters, because whilst fleeing from this terrible danger, he just keeps running into more and more danger, because once again, the Underdark, where he is hiding, is a very hostile environment. It's very unforgiving. Along the way, he picks up some companions who it contributes to the Fong family aspect of it. There's some interesting characters. We have one in particular who was also subject to a pretty significant curse, and throughout the and it just adds another layer of anticipation, because we have this character who is essentially trying to hold on to his innate nature, but because of the change that was wrought in him, he's beginning to slip into this murderous rage. He's beginning to turn into this murderous entity, and throughout his entire time with Drizzt, it kind of becomes this will they won't they situation, where every danger that they face, every challenge that they face, it always has this underpinning of, will this be the straw that breaks the camel back? Will this be what eventually triggers this guy to turn on Drizzt and his other companion? It's just wonderfully done how R.A. Salvatore just takes these different plot lines. He did it in Homeland, and he did it again in Exile. He takes these different threads and different plot lines and just weaves them together and creates this tale of just constant action, constant intensity, constant anticipation. It's just wonderfully done, and it's all driven by intense characterization, because throughout this all we have Drizzt just internalizing the situation that he's facing. We trying to decide what's the best way forward. Does he continue to put his companions in danger? Does he choose what is the best way out of this situation? And he doesn't even know the nature of the danger that stalks him, and it's a terrible blow. It will be a terrible blow. I really wish I could discuss it, because the nature of that threat is just another layer on top of the characterization of just how great this entire thing is. All in all, Exile was just an amazing follow-up to Homeland. It's one of those rare cases where a second book is as good, if not better, than the first, and it really ratchets things up. It expands the world. It gives us a really good sense of where things are headed. And once again, at the end of this book, Drizzt is forced to make a choice. He doesn't have the full picture, so he decides to makes a choice that sets him on the path to eventually become the character that is met in the very first book that was published featuring him, which is the first book of the Icewind Dale trilogy. And the third book in this series is the one that deals with the repercussions of this choice, and the third book is Sojourn. In this book, Drizzt essentially leaves. He comes into the world above ground, and he sets out to find a new home for himself, essentially. And what follows is once again a series of adventures. He one of the big running themes throughout this entire exercise, as he goes from place to place trying to find a home for himself, is it's a meditation on, it's a discussion on persecution, it's a discussion on bias and these kind of things, because we have Drizzt, he's a dark elf. The entire surface world does not want to be near. They treat dark elves as homicidal lunatics, which pretty much they are for the majority of their exposure to them. They've never met someone like Drizzt who does not behave like a normal dark elf. And meanwhile, Drizzt, he sticks to his guns, he sticks to his morals, he's just trying to find a home for himself. And it brings him into constant conflict every time he tries to do it. There's a series of misunderstandings, he becomes the object of persecution, he becomes a constant source of conflict. Everywhere he goes, he tries to just be himself, he just tries to live a peaceful life, a quiet life, but the world does just not let him hang up his scimitars. And once again, over the course of this running series of events, he faces new threats that just expand the world for us. Once again, we have Salvatore using the gimmick of a looming threat that just haunts Drizzt throughout the course of the novel, with or without his knowledge. And in this case, we have a human who has such a deep bias against Drizzt, not necessarily because of Drizzt's own actions. He just has such a deep bias against Drizzt that he literally spends years just trying to kill Drizzt, trying to bring him down, tracking him across the length and breadth of the world, no matter what the cost to him, just to bring Drizzt down. And eventually it's a tiresome situation that eventually forces Drizzt to once again make a choice. But finally we have him make a choice that quote unquote was the right one. In the first one, it's debatable. In Homeland, it's debatable whether he made the right choice or not, given the events that happened. In Exile, he didn't have a clear picture, or he may have made a very different choice. In Sojourn, he eventually comes to pretty much the very last place that could be that he could possibly have a home, and in there, he once again he comes into constant conflict. But this time, he manages to form bonds. He manages to form some semblance of a society, and it just works out well. It's once again, it's just an absolute treat of characterization, because we have just dealing with with just the combination of his life to this point. We have the introduction of a new cast of characters over the course of the novels who treat Drizzt in different ways, who see him as more than just a murderous dark elf. It just works well. It once again, an epic ride from start to finish. These books, they're just amazing books. They're everything I love about epic fantasy. They're everything I love about sword and sorcery. They are a bit formulaic. Now that I have 3 books, now that I think back on it and I have 3 books to compare, they are slightly formulaic in the way that Salvatore approaches things, but his writing is spectacular, his characterization is spectacular, the plot is intense, the action is intense, the gimmicks that he uses to create the intensity, they just work. They're engaging, they're exciting, they're fun to read right from the start to finish. The world building is marvelous because it just has this rich lore to draw on. Like it's everything I love about epic fantasy in a pretty great package. What else can I say about it? These novels, for a long time now I've seen these novels floating around, and they have the distinction of being a series of, they're essentially fan fiction, essentially licensed fan fiction. They have the distinction of being novels of a licensed world, a licensed IP world, that are constantly recommended to just general fantasy genre fans. because of the fact of how good they are. They're similar to the Thrawn books, by Timothy Zahn in Star Wars. They're Heir to the Empire, the Dark Force Rising, those 3 books. The Heir to the Empire trilogy, basically, in that they may have started out in this as basically IP fan fiction, whatever you want to call it, but they did make the jump into quote-unquote mainstream science fiction and mainstream fantasy because of the fact that they're just so good that even the fans of the mainstream genre, they may not necessarily be fans of this world, which is the case. I personally, I know very little about Dungeons and Dragons. I know very little about Forgotten Realms, but I just immensely enjoy these novels. I didn't need to know anything about these worlds to just jump into these books and enjoy an excellently plotted book with an absolutely captivating main character and just a fun action romp from start to finish. And that's what sets these books apart from other shared world licensed fan fiction, whatever you want to call it. This is the first 3 books featuring Drizzt Du'Orden of nearly 40 books, and just based on this I can tell you I will definitely be reading the rest. I absolutely love this. I highly recommend you check out this trilogy if you're a fan of any form of fantasy, if you're a fan of Forgotten Realms, if you're a fan of Dungeons and Dragons, whatever it is. Drizzt he's the white-haired swordsman. He's that particular archetype of fantasy. But when I compare him to the other ones, when I compare him to Elric, there's a reason why he is arguably the most popular. It's all because of R.A. Salvatore. Just what an amazing job he did of writing these books from start to finish. Highly recommend you check these out. I'm going to be simmering on these for quite a while, but I can easily see these books hitting my quite a few of my top 10 lists to come in the future. And that's pretty much everything I have to say about the Dark Elf trilogy. The Dark Elf trilogy, which contains Homeland, Exile, and Sojourn. Highly recommended. Check it out. Wonderful place to start off your Forgotten Realms journey. Wonderful place to start off reading about Drizzt Du'Orden and just his legacy as a major character of fantasy. This is probably going to be the longest video of any review I've ever done, the longest review of any book I've ever done. If by some miracle you've actually made it this far into the video, thank you very much for watching. Let me know what you think about this series in the comments, whether you read it or not, and I hope to see you again in the future.